Welcome to the Observe Day podcast, the show where we celebrate the days that matter. From holidays to meaningful observances, we bring you inspiring conversations, stories, and ideas to make each day count. Whether it's raising awareness, learning something new, or simply sparking joy, this is your space to explore the calendar in a whole new way. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I'm excited to share today's observance with you. Let's dive in. Roger Canaff is a former New York City Special Victims prosecutor and a leading voice in the global fight against sexual violence and exploitation. As a past president of End Violence Against Women International, Roger has spent decades advocating for survivors, training professionals, and shaping trauma-informed approaches within the justice system. Today, he's helping us explore a crucial theme for the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, understanding how technology, trauma, and systemic barriers intersect and what a truly survival-centered justice system can look like. Welcome to the podcast, Roger.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You spent your career prosecuting some of the most complex sexual violence cases. How did you get started doing what you do?
How did I get started? That's a good question. I had an interest in working with victims of violence and sexual exploitation from a pretty early age. I would say around the time that I became interested in law school, I figured that I wanted to be a part of the American system of law enforcement, but as an attorney. So that's really what got me started. One interesting thing was that at the time that I began this work in the late 90s, there weren't many men that were involved in it. It was a little bit of unfortunate sexism that was coming into play in the American prosecution community, which I think is still there, although to a far less extent. But there weren't very many men who were interested in special victims work. Most of the time, if there was a sexual assault case or a child abuse case, someone in the office would seek to give it to a female prosecutor, just assuming that they would be better at it. And oftentimes that was the case, but I don't think that was necessarily true. So because I was rare somewhat in terms of a man doing these cases, after a couple of years, I was asked to be a part of the training circuit, which is what got me into the training and consulting side of it. Again, simply because there weren't too many men that were doing it. But I thought it was really wonderful work.
Yeah, well, after decades in the field, how has your view of justice evolved, especially when it comes to survival care and systemic accountability?
I think that we have made wonderful, wonderful progress in understanding victimization. That is something that I think we really have done well. There's been quite a bit of just evolution with regard to societal attitudes about victimization, understanding that not all victims of violence will react the same way, understanding that victims of violence may have difficulty expressing themselves. There were many things that happened years ago that could really just destroy a legal case simply because the victim may have acted in ways that were counterintuitive, or she or he may have done something that would lead an investigator to believe that they were incorrect or they were lying or something of that nature. We now have a much better understanding of how victimization works from a psychological standpoint. And I think that is terrific. We still, though, have a long way to go, particularly with what I call underserved populations. And simply that means individuals who are outside of societal norms, at least here in the US. So individuals who are transgender, individuals who identify as homosexual, individuals who are experiencing homelessness, certain racial and ethnic minorities, people like that are often not served correctly by the criminal justice system or by the societal response to sexual assault, period. And I think we still have a long way to go in that regard, but I do think we've made progress.
What does the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women mean to you professionally?
Yeah, I think it is fantastic that there is an observation about that, again, on a particular day. There are many days that cross-culturally, across nations, we seek to recognize. I think it's wonderful that we have that day. I know in the United States, we have an awareness month regarding sexual assault. We have another awareness month regarding child abuse. And I think those are important. It's always good to have at least a day. We should, of course, be focusing on it every day. But for the world to actually pause and, among all of the tremendous, tremendous problems and challenges that face all of us, to have a date where we can sort of stop and say, hey, let's focus on this, the exploitation of human beings, particularly violence against them of a sexual nature, or interpersonal violence, things of that nature. I'm glad that we have.
Yeah, well, thank you. Um, Technology and AI is growing at a very rapid rate, and you've called AI the new frontier of sexual exploitation. How are AI tools being misused to harm vulnerable people, especially women and children?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the biggest problem with particularly generative AI, which is, technology where an individual can take a photograph and then manipulate that photograph, I think that's probably among the most dangerous things out there when it comes to exploitation and sexual violence. Even though if a person uses AI to alter the image or to create a video from the simple image of a person, uh, understanding that that is not hands-on violence, understanding that the individual who is offending is using a computer to generate an image or a video for their own pleasure, or to trade, or to seek revenge, or whatever, I think it is still a violent act, because it causes a tremendous amount of emotional distress on the person who's being victimized. And basically, the way it can work now, and unfortunately, this is something that is advertised across many, many social media platforms in the US. We see it on Instagram, we see it on Facebook, even though those companies have officially said, we're not going to tolerate that. We don't want that kind of
Yeah.
traffic. And I believe that they are taking steps to eliminate it, but there are many ways to get around it. So what right now, I think the most dangerous thing is that literally almost any photograph of almost any individual, that individual can be a newborn baby, that individual can be an adult female, male, whatever. But any image of a person can be uploaded into certain engines that use generative AI, and the image can be manipulated into a pornographic image, or an image, even a video of that individual in a sexually compromising position, or performing a sexual act. And again, this kind of thing is actually still being advertised on social media platforms across the board. And Meta in particular still has them. They still come up regularly, and basically the user, or the person who's on social media, on their feed, will simply see an image of usually an attractive, usually white female, and then all around that image there are suggestive images of that person partially unclothed, images of that person often performing a sex act, although basically you see their head sort of moving back and forth as if they were. So it's extremely disturbing. And they are, this technology is flat out advertised to people that, hey, upload a photograph and we can turn that image into a video, or we can turn that image into a pornographic photograph for your use, that you can either use for your own pleasure, or that you can trade, or that you can use against that person to suggest to the world that they are actually the person that's in the pornographic
Yeah.
video, or the pornographic photograph. So it is extremely dangerous, and it's almost impossible. The technology is becoming so that it's almost impossible for the average person to tell the difference.
Well, when we talk about deepfakes and AI-generated sexualized images, how far behind is the law? And what policy changes do you believe are most urgent?
I think that no matter how fast the law attempts to react, and again, I can only speak from my perspective as a practitioner of American law and the American criminal justice system, but I think no matter how fast the laws change, the perpetrators are always sort of a half step ahead, especially when it comes to technology. So I think we're always going to be a little bit behind the curve. But I think probably what should happen now is there should be strict laws against the non-consensual use of imagery for anything that that is not consented to by the person in question. So there should be no question in the world that, and many states are passing laws like this, and the federal government actually has one in place again here in the US. So some progress is being made. Just the idea that, hey, this is a punishable offense. If you capture somebody's image, if you take a picture of them on the street, or you pull it from a yearbook or from a social media site, and then you manipulate that image and turn it into a video, that's got to be an illegal act. So that needs to be illegal across the board. And it needs to be not just illegal in theory, it needs to be punished. It needs to be prosecutable. I think that is probably the initial thing. But I think even more important than that, I think massive social media platforms that allow this technology to be proliferated, I think they need to do much more than they are doing to make sure that this technology is not offered to individuals, because that's part of the problem. It's out there.
Yeah.
Here in the US, an individual can go onto one of these sites and they will almost always very quickly see an advertisement saying upload a photograph and you can turn it into all sorts of pornographic and disturbing variations of it. And I think that needs to stop. The social media platforms are saying they are trying to stop it. They're saying it's against their policy. They talk about how there are evasive measures being done. This is why I said a minute ago, the bad guys are kind of always a half step ahead of us. That's true. And they do evade blockers and things of that nature. But I still think, given the amount of revenue they produce, given the amount of money that's in play, I believe that social media platforms, certainly in the US and in other places, can do much more than they are doing to prevent this technology from getting out there.
Yeah. Well, at the beginning of the episode, you talked about how 17 minority groups are not being catered for when it comes to issues regarding elimination of uh, violence against women. For many survivors, especially from the immigrant, LGBTQ plus communities, reporting abuse, and even had, you said, the homeless, right, can feel dangerous. What are the key systemic failures keeping these voices unheard?
I think the systemic failures that are keeping underserved populations, unfortunately, in an underserved state, I think the key problems are a lack of recognition of the humanity of those individuals. I think
Well,
governments and cultures tend to, unfortunately, I think there's just sort of there's a lack of understanding and sympathy, if that's the right word, for individuals who are outside the mainstream. So there are still far, far, far too many people who believe that, well, if a person is lesbian or gay, well, that's probably a choice they made, and therefore they have to live with the ramifications of it. Or if a person is experiencing homelessness, then that person must have done something to bring that on. Therefore, it's their fault and it's not really our responsibility. I think there are so many people who are in marginalized groups who don't receive the kind of respect or humanity or dignity that puts them in front of us and says, this is a person that we need to care about. And it's also important to understand that if we disregard marginalized individuals, we're putting everyone at risk, because perpetrators are emboldened if they feel that they can, without punishment, go after a person who is marginalized or go after a person who is on the fringes of society. They're eventually going to, they're going to get away with it more and more, and they're eventually going to threaten greater elements of the population. That's not the reason that we should be better. We should be better because it's the right thing to do. But even if we're looking at it selfishly, we need to understand that if we're not protecting everybody, we're not protecting anybody well enough.
yeah. Well, one of the things I noticed is when it comes to issues regarding sexual violence of women, how do you think journalists and content creators can approach stories of sexual violence more responsibly to educate, not to exploit or profit from?
I think everyone in the journalistic community has a responsibility to portray individuals correctly, certainly, regardless of what the story is. When it comes to reporting on sexual violence, I think it's important for journalists, writers, for anybody who is sort of reflecting society. I think it's important for them to understand the true dynamics behind sexual violence as much as it's important for professional responders, for prosecutors, for investigators, for things of that nature. Reporters, journalists, they need to also understand the dynamics behind violence to understand how to report on it correctly. So if there's a story about an individual who, a woman comes forward, claims that she is sexually assaulted, especially if the perpetrator is a celebrity, a powerful male, something of that nature, I think the journalist has a responsibility to report on the story correctly rather than focusing on, uh, you know, a, a an aspect of the story that's probably myth. For instance, well, this individual wasn't able to describe fully what happened to her, and that's cast doubt on her. Even if we are attempting to just report facts and not editorialize, if we don't understand the dynamics, any of us are very likely to concentrate on what is a perceived fact or a part of the story that really isn't relevant, when what actually is relevant is what actually happened and what the dynamics are and how the person was chosen for victimization in the first place.
Well, after years of seeing both progress and setbacks, doing this work that you do, what gives you hope today regarding the elimination of sexual violence against women?
Oh, I have tremendous hope, and the reason I do is because I really believe that again, as a society, I think we're evolving very well and very quickly toward the acceptance of. First of all, I think we're much better at accepting that this kind of violence happens. In years past, it's been very difficult for people to imagine that sexual violence occurs at all, or they believe that, well, if it does occur, it had to have been somehow, quote unquote, the fault of the victim. She must have done something to invite this. She must have walked down the wrong alley. She must have been wearing the wrong clothing. Even with children, and that's one side of it. The other side of it is, and I think this is particularly true with children, I believe society had a hard time understanding and believing that this actually happens at all. I think people would
Yeah,
acknowledge that there was child sexual abuse, but I think a lot of people believe that, well, that only happens in really terrible places or really poor communities. And that's not true at all. Child
yeah,
sexual exploitation happens absolutely everywhere. There's no connection between socioeconomic status or poverty. So what gives me hope is I think in general, as a society, we are much, much better at sympathizing and understanding what these dynamics are. And I think the dynamics and the truth is proliferating quite a bit. And I think that's great. Just the fact that we're willing to speak about it. I mean, the fact that, I'm on a podcast with you and we're discussing this on a major platform, that's something that would not have happened even 25 or 30 years ago. So
yeah.
awareness gives me hope probably more than anything.
And what does a truly survival-centered future look like on each of us? Help create it.
I think we want to get to a place where everyone, literally all of us, are prepared to be responders to sexual violence, meaning we must all accept the fact that sexual violence occurs in the world. Unfortunately, it's something that rides the tide of humanity. It's probably going to continue to happen. And all of us are potential responders, not just prosecutors or police or investigators, but wives, sons, mothers, coworkers, friends. All of us are potential responders. And I can say very confidently that when a person who has experienced sexual violence, when a victim, when she or he reveals that to an individual, the person that they uh, disclosed to, that person's response has a lot to do with how quickly and how thoroughly they heal. So I think the continued development in understanding of how sexual violence works will make every one of us potentially better responders, so that when somebody comes to us and says, hey, I was victimized, this happened to me, rather than saying, well, are you sure, or well, what did you do to bring that on, or how is this somehow your fault, or are you sure you're not making this up, rather than that, we will frankly start by believing. We'll begin by accepting that person's account and saying to them, I'm sorry that happened to you, how can I make you feel safe?
Yeah,
That I think ultimately is the world that we want, and I think that will bring down sexual violence quite a bit. I don't think it'll ever put it out of business, unfortunately, but I think it has a
yeah,
great.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for that recommendation. Um, where can listeners learn more about this work that you do and also connect with you?
You can connect with me. Probably the easiest way is through my website. It's rogercanaff.com. So it's ROGERCANAFF. I'm always happy to, I receive inquiries through there. Individuals reach out to me for all sorts of reasons. And if there's an answer that I don't know, I can be very helpful in getting a person in touch with some wonderful women and men who are professional responders, who are out there, who are doing this work and can provide immediate assistance as needed.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I'll put the link in the description and the show notes so that listeners can click and go directly to the site. Thank you so much, Roger. It's been an absolute delight chatting with you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Wisdom. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. That's it for today's episode of the Observe Day podcast. Thank you for spending your time with us as we explore today's observance. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend who'd love to celebrate life's special days too. Don't forget to join the newsletter at observeday.com/join for more observance stories, tips, and updates. Until next time, keep finding meaning in every day.